Hello there. The subject is pollination. And the first question is what is meant by pollination? I'm going to let the study questions just guide this little discussion here. What is pollination? It's a transfer. It's very simply a transfer. It's the transfer of pollen from an anther to a stigma. Here we go again. What is it? Pollination is transfer of pollen from an anther to a stigma. One more time. Pollination, transfer of pollen from an anther to a stigma. Now, how does that take place? The next question is, how does pollination take place in addition to self-pollination? Let me very briefly mention self-pollination, and there'll be no questions on it, so you can quickly forget what I said if you want to. But some species of plants pollinate in the simplest way possible, and that is the pollen from this anther rubs off on this stigma. They're about the same height, so to speak, and so it's called self-pollination for plants with their reproductive system. That works just fine for lots of species. Self-pollination, anther to a stigma of the same flower. But we're going to concentrate on cross-pollination, how pollen gets from this anther to another stigma of the species of the same flower. There's two basic ways that takes place. Two basic ways that cross-pollination takes place. And I usually ask, who can think of one of them? And so I get, sometimes I get, bugs and bees and so forth. And I say, yeah, that falls under a more general category of animal pollination. Animal pollination. And so we're talking about bugs, bees, but also birds, various kinds, and also bats also transfer pollen from an anther to a stigma. So various members of the animal kingdom, some insects, some birds, some even mammals, transfer pollen from anther to stigma. But you know what? If that's all there was to pollination, no one would be sneezing from pollen. And so, but a lot of people are. And so what's the other major way that pollen gets from an anther to a stigma? Yeah, by wind. And so there's wind pollination. Animal pollination and wind pollination. So we're going to kind of bring out some of the differences between the two. They are specialties. A flower can't do both. It specializes in one or the other. And so we'll see why in just a minute, why that has to be a specialty. So number 3 says, what reward do most flowering plant species offer to pollinators? Now, we're talking about pollinators. We're talking about what? Animal pollination? This question is about animal pollination. Pollinators don't work for free. No, they get a paycheck. They get paid. And they usually get paid in the form of concentrated sugar water called what? Nectar. Nectar. And where are the nectar glands? They're way down deep in the flower. And they serve one function, and that is to lure insects or birds down into the flower. In the process, what do those insects or animals do? They rub some of the anthers have opened up by this time. The pollen it's ready to be dispersed, ready to be pollinated, ready to be carried to a stigma. And so the animal goes down after the nectar. Pollen brushes off, sticks to that animal, and the animal then goes to the next flower, yellow flower to yellow flower to yellow flower to yellow flower. They're all ready at the same time. And in the process of going after nectar the next flower brushes that pollen off on the stigma of the next flower. And so nectar is the reward. Do you suppose those animals know they're working for a paycheck? I don't think so. I think that's just all in the great circle of life, that Elton John sings about in The Lion King, how it all fits together. All right, and so we can say this: animal pollinated flowers produce nectar quite often, most of the time, and there's no nectar over here. Why bother? If you're just sending your pollen off in the breezes, you're not trying to attract a pollinator. All right, and then we have 3 little thought questions here. One of them is, in general, which do you suppose have prettier petals? Wind or animal pollinated plants? Which one do you think is going to invest in the pretty petals? Pretty obvious. Which one? Which one? I guess it's these, right? What did we say pretty petals are for? Their function is to attract pollinators. Yeah, and so if you see a flower out in the wildflower that has pretty petals, you can chalk it up animal pollination, pretty petals, and those actually are a signal to the pollinators. You know, this flower is ready, and so is the next one over there that's the same color, pretty petals. Now, what about wind pollinated? What are their petals for? A lot of them don't even have petals, or the petals are so insignificant. They're probably a lot of people don't even know they're flowers. For example, oak trees. A lot of people don't know oak trees make flowers. Make lots of flowers. They don't have petals, so this thing's just some kind of fuzz or something. So reduced or no petals. Reduced or no petals. Either reduced petals or no petals. And so, a very different strategy. Let me draw a line down so we don't get these confused. All right, what else? In general, which produce the most pollen? Wind or animal pollinated plants? Well, which ones do you think will produce the most pollen? Animal pollinated or wind pollinated? I'm usually asking students in person this if I'm in a classroom. I can't do that to you, but you can probably figure it out. What makes sense? Wind pollinated produce the most pollen or animal pollinated? Well, most students accurately guess it's wind. Why is that? Because you're just sending the pollen off in the breezes. You better make a whole bunch of it because you're just hoping it hits a stigma down there that's downwind. Now, some species of plants, in fact, this whole plant families, are kind of specialized to catch that pollen. For example, the grass family. The grass family has stigmas that are like big feathers, big feathery stigmas. And so the entire grass family is wind pollinated. And feathery stigmas, why is that helpful? The pollen blowing by will catch someplace on that big old feathery stigma, and it has a better chance of hitting its target. It's a big target, a big feathery stigma. Okay, and so we have over here lots of pollen, and that pollen is light and dry, light and relatively dry, so it'll float in the breezes. Whereas not so much pollen over here, because it doesn't have to. It's got an animal just taking it from flower to flower, so not so much pollen. And also the pollen is sticky. The pollen is sticky. It sticks. It wouldn't blow in the breezes anyway. It sticks to an animal. It sticks together in big wads, sticks to the animal. It's not going to float off the breezes. You can see these are two specialties, two different specialties. Why does, by the way, there's a question here. Why does this make sense in terms of lots of pollen here? And so why does it make sense for wind pollinated plants to produce lots of pollen? Because wind pollination is what? It's a very imprecise means of dispersal. Very inexact, very imprecise. You're just sending it off into the breezes and hoping it hits a flower, a stigma of a flower of the same species downwind. This is a very exact means of pollination, as the bee or the bird goes from red flower to red flower to red flower, or blue flower to blue flower to blue flower. That's very exact. This is very inexact. So that's why it makes sense, I suppose, to produce lots and lots and lots of pollen. One last thought question here, and we'll shut this video down. It says, in general, do you think bee pollen is the kind of pollen that causes allergies? Well, what in the world is bee pollen? Well, you can go to lots of places. You used to have to go to health food stores. Now you go to Walmart or whatever, and you can buy a bottle. Over in the supplement section, vitamins, minerals, all that stuff, it says bee pollen. Where did that come from? Well, it came from a beehive. And so the beekeepers, in order to make an extra buck, they strain the pollen, and they get pollen that is mixed up in the honey and so forth, and then they go through a process, and They get the pollen separated, and they put it in capsules, and put the capsules in bottles and sell it to people. All right. And so what's the question about this bee pollen? In general, do you think bee pollen is the kind of pollen that causes allergies? What do you think? Does it cause allergies or not? Well, you probably have guessed. How did pollen get to the beehive? It got there stuck to a bee, did it not? Yes, it did. In other words, it was pollen carried by an animal, but what's the kind of pollen that makes people sneeze? This kind here. And let me back up a step. Why do people even take bee pollen? Well, they think if they take bee pollen, it'll help create resistance to pollen allergies. Give them some resistance to those allergies. Is that a good premise? Oh, the bee pollen they're buying is the pollen carried by animals. The pollen they're sneezing from is pollen carried by wind. Ooh, I don't know about that. Unless somebody can prove that this pollen has exactly the same stuff in it, this pollen that makes people sneeze, then there's a problem. Is there a lot of research gone into that type of thing? You look it up. Very, very little. Oh, so if you're a bee pollen person, I apologize. If you think it's helping you, keep taking it, but I'm not sure. All right. I think that shuts down that little section. We'll pick up the discussion with another video. All right. Bye-bye.